Welcome to another Cybercast from Detour Books, Found in Translation. We're an online-only bookstore featuring world literature in English translation, curated children's books, and uncommon gifts for kids and curious adults. I'm Sammy Keats, and today Sheva Zucker and Vivi Lachs are here to talk about their work as translators and delve a bit into their friendship as teacher and student. Sheva Zucker, who is with us from New York City, is a renowned Yiddish instructor, translator, writer, editor, and producer of the book, The Golden Peacock, Voice of the Yiddish Writer. The new release that we'll be talking about today is bilingual Yiddish-English and features the work of several translators, including Sheva. Included with the book are voice recordings in both CD and digital formats, and we'll hear a selection of one of the 12 Yiddish writers a little later. Vivi Lachs is joining us from the UK, and Vivi is a cultural historian, writer, translator, and performer who has published 2 books now on Jewish life in London's East End, and will be talking with us today about her latest book, London Yiddish Town, East End Jewish Life in Sketch and Story, 1930 to 1950, selected works of Katie Brown, A.M. Kaiser, and I.A. Liski. So thanks for taking the time to be with us today. And first, I want to congratulate you both on taking on these really complex translation projects. It must be very gratifying to have them come to fruition, especially now in the forefront of this Yiddish cultural renaissance. Now we're going to be talking about your work as writers and translators, but first, Vivi, will you tell us a little bit about how you and Sheva met?
Well, I mean, when people are writers and teachers and they write about their teaching, although actually Sheva and I only met, was it about 3 years ago, in person, I've known Sheva for decades, because when I started learning Yiddish, I used her books and I started at the beginning. And so, yeah, any grammatical mistakes I make is all down to Sheva, really. And I mean, together with huge thousands of Yiddish speakers, learners, students, who've used Sheva's books. So when I actually met Sheva 3 years ago, it was a real delight. And it was a delight also to see that in person, she was a good teacher as well as in her books. So it was very, very lovely.
Well, thank you. I first heard of Vivi. It was one Zoomer program. I think I missed you, but you had given some talks and I guess illustrated by song about the Yiddish musical scene in the UK. And I can't remember why it was, but I kept hearing, oh yeah, Vivi Lachs was here. Vivi Lachs was here. You know, who is this Vivi Lachs? You know, so finally, I found out who you were. And then after being in my class at the summer program at YIVO,
which was a delight.
Was it last year that you did an online class? It was sometime in the
pandemic. Yeah, it was.
And one of the great things about being a Yiddish teacher, and not necessarily in a university, is you have these amazing students. And especially with online, people keep popping up all over the place in different Zooms and different classes, and a lot of your students are really doing things. I mean, they're not students in that way, you know, they're writers, they're translators, they're anthologizers, whatever, and Vivi is one.
But I think that's a wonderful thing about Yiddish students, is that because people come at it at all ages, we're all like colleagues, really. And so we bring all this stuff, and then it makes it sort of very easy to love and enjoy each other, I think, and give each other cover, really respect each other for what we're doing and the fabulous teaching.
Yeah, and Vivi gave a presentation in class about these writers, and I think it was less than a year ago. So when the book actually came out and I saw it through Detour Books, I said, wow, that was fast. Of course, it was probably decades of agony, but it seemed like overnight she did it.
Well, let's delve into the books. So Sheva, let's begin with the Golden Peacock. So the first edition included voice recordings of 12 Yiddish writers reading their work in Yiddish, and it had 2 booklets that provided extensive notes on the compilation. And how did the Golden Peacock evolve and then become bilingual? And also, could you tell us about your collaboration with Trudy Kessler?
Okay, so actually the first one, which was all Yiddish, had 10, and then the second one had 12. So it really began as I would say, kind of a linguistic project. When I did the recordings for my first textbook, I had a dialect CD, and I thought it would really be good to do more of that. And I also, this was already 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. And it was before the internet had sort of just exploded. And I had this almost frantic feeling that the voices of Yiddish speakers were just not going to be there anymore. And that it was really important to somehow gather them. And I thought, well, what's really the best way to gather these voices so that students and whatever interested parties going forward will be able to hear them. And so the idea of writers came to me. So it really started very much as a pedagogical thing. And then of course it took off in its own literary way. So I did that and 20 some years ago, and I had quite soon after, but I can't remember, I started to think, it would be really good to do this bilingually because maybe it would reach a different audience. I'm not sure how much of a different audience it actually reaches. It does somewhat. I mean, we won't go into that. But somebody who's not at all interested in Yiddish is not going to suddenly be interested because it's in English. But people that are maybe a little bit afraid, or even students that can't really handle materials in Yiddish, are going to be interested in this. So somehow this idea of doing it in Yiddish came to me, in English as well. I took a few things out. I removed one writer, not because I didn't like her, but she had a long piece, Yantamash, of about 15 minutes, and that would mean 15 minutes of English, and I didn't really want 15 minutes of English at a stretch. And I took in 3, what I thought were popular, always with the eye on the market, popular writers, Itzik Manger and Rachel Korn and Elie Wiesel, who I thought, well, there's name recognition for the non-Yiddish public. And the thing he has in here is quite beautiful. And then I had to laugh when you asked. Yes, my collaboration with Trudy Kessler, she happens to be my sister-in-law. So I thought, let's keep it in the family. And I thought, why not ask Trudy? She's a teacher, a professor of voice and speech. She enjoys this kind of thing. She's not going to charge me an arm and a leg or anything at all. And so that, very plain terms, is how it happened.
And you went back and forth. You both did some of the English translations, right?
Yeah, I mean, we were together when we did it. Once or twice, I can't remember. I think once in New York and once in North Carolina. I was living there. And basically she just said, give me what you want to give me. I mean, she's not terribly familiar with the things. And so I took the ones that, I guess there's certain ones that I just, really love, like Blattstein's A Gute Nacht Welt or Yechiel Schreibman. And I mean, I gave her a lot of good stuff, but I have to say the things that I felt like a real connection with, I generally took for myself, but it's pretty much 50-50.
Okay. The new bilingual edition is such a valuable history and language teaching tool, as well as a literary gift to non-Yiddish speaking readers. In the program notes, your sort of full disclosure about the quality of the recordings only made me want to listen more closely to the nuances of the live sound they gave. So let's hear one of the recordings now. And Sheva, will you give us some background on the selection you chose?
Yes, so selection I chose is by Celia Dropkin, and I think we'd like to listen, it's probably 20 seconds, to the little musical intro that comes before it. Each selection has a musical intro. And why is this? Because I think that in the music, we can very much see the way that Dropkin in general operates. Dropkin was a writer who was born in Belarus, came to America, lived her life, most of her life in Brooklyn. She was known for writing very passionate, sensuous, erotic, perhaps even poetry, which supposedly was something that women introduced into Yiddish poetry. And when you listen to her, you always hear this kind of undercurrent. You feel this almost frenzied sense in her voice at the same time that she might be talking about love. So you always feel this Unruhigkeit and disquiet. And so the piece that the 20 seconds I think are very instructive. Let me give you the words from which this poem, it's like Frank London had set this poem to music. I would like to see how you sleep when you lose your power over yourself, over me. I would like to see you dead. So the first time I heard the music, I thought, no, he doesn't get it at all. It's very lovely and it's almost like a lullaby. And I remember the first time I heard it, I was with a friend at a concert of the Klezmatics. She knows Yiddish well, and she said, "Oh, it's so beautiful." And I said, "Do you know what they're singing?" And she said, "No, what are they singing?" And I said, "I'd like to see you dead. That's what they're singing." And she was like, "No, it can't be." It's and so the more I sort of read Dropkin, I said, no. The Klezmatics knew what they were up to. It's this kind of on the surface, let me lull you to sleep. And at the same time, you can drop dead. That's how angry I am at you at this moment. So the piece that we have also has a little bit of that. I would say it has more of the frenetic anxiety and less of the lulling. It's called Durch Nacht und Regen, Through Night and Rain, or Outspread Arms of Trees. And as far as I can understand it, she's describing a scene where she and her lover are in a car, and the lights, and they're kind of secluded by the trees, but at the same time they're sort of as she calls it, a carnival of lights. And the way she reads it, I did it on one Zoom, and somebody said, "Are you sure the speed was right? Maybe you messed up the speed." And I said, no, I'm quite sure the speed was right. And that also, I think, has to do with the way that her emotions come to a crescendo. So let's listen.
Yeah, let's listen.
Celia Dropkin.
Ze praat de hand van Wemer, ze praat de hand von Licht und ein bläuer Gesicht. Du tragst sie durch ein Park, auf Spiegeln schwarz zu werden, durch Nacht von Regen. Wemer und Wahlen, in Spiel von nassen Strahlen. Der Park ist voll mit Strahlen, mit Milchwegen, Kametten, mit gildenen Ziretten, mit gildenen Gewerben, von reite grüne Spinnen, von Treffeklichten Reit, von Treffeklichten Grün, mit Regen und mit Leben, was patscht in der Maschine. Der Park ist wie ein Saal, mit Unkel und Parkett, mit Wemer Kandelabren, was zwischen sehr Licht, mit gelben Otterlicht. Anotte Karneval und Tänzen Graffiti in Kischewdicken Glee von schwarzen Kandelabren, von alle Farben, nach schwarzem golden grün, nach schwarzem golden red. Und du in der Maschine, bleich wie Tät. Zu prallt Hand von Bemer, zu prallt Hand von Licht, und ein bleich Gesicht, und ein Hand wie Bemer, und ein Hand wie Licht.
Through night and rain, outstretched arms of trees. Outstretched arms of trees, outstretched arms of light, and your pale face floats through the park in mirrors, black roads, through night and rain. Veiled trees in a play of damp rays, the park is filled with rays, with milkways, comets, with golden daggers, with golden webs of red-green spiders, of red traffic lights, of green traffic lights, with rain and with life beating down on the car. The park is like a hall with a dark parquet with candelabra trees mixing their light with the yellow headlights. A carnival of cars, no dancing, no confetti, in the enchanted glow of black candelabras of every color, now black and golden green, now black and golden red, and you in the car, pale, pale as the dead. Outstretched arms of trees, outstretched arms of light, and your pale face, and your arms like trees, and your arms like light.
Yes, I just love this rhythmic sort of urgency in her voice. It was really engaging, and I'm looking forward to reading it again. So, Vivi, I wondered, have you heard any recordings of the authors in your book?
Well, I mean, that's quite an obvious question. Although when you're talking about London, people would go, what? What sort of question is that? Because the authors in my book were almost totally unknown, except for this very small Yiddish speaking community in London. And I mean, interestingly enough, all three authors, who are Katie Brown, Aryeh Meyer Kaiser, and Yehuda Isomer Liski, all these three authors have got very, very readable pieces of fiction that they write. And they're not only readable, but we know that they were read out. So we know that Katie Brown was involved in the Yiddish theatre, and we know that Aryeh Meyer Kaiser was an activist in the community, and we know that Liski was incredibly involved in politics. And what we also know is that all three of them were journalists, and they're all writing for the newspapers, and they're all there in their stories. So they were certainly read aloud. Now, there are two instances I've actually got people writing that they heard Kaiser's stories being read on Israeli radio, actually, after Kaiser died. Now, I have not been able to track these down, and I certainly will at some point. I'll make sure that that does get done. We also know that people were not just reading newspapers on their own. They were reading them as families. They were reading them as in their workshops. And so you'd have someone reading stuff out. And because the three writers are all so readable, I'm absolutely convinced that there must have been recordings, or there certainly were live performances of these pieces. But no, as far as I know, there are no recordings that continue to exist. And the British community was so much smaller than its American equivalent, and they had a lot of connections with America, and in fact with North America. And in fact the connections are so strong that you'll find very similar themes and very similar pieces, and often they even shared pieces and printed each other's pieces. But in Britain, we lost Yiddish a generation before North America. Partly that's because it's a much smaller community, and partly because the whole project of Anglicization, getting people into English ways of life and being English and speaking English, was so powerful in Britain that we really lost that Yiddish. So these writers are writing in the 30s and 40s. Already by the 20s and even the 10s, Yiddish is disappearing pretty quickly. By the 30s and 40s, especially the 40s, I mean, and post-Blitz, obviously, it's like completely huge that Yiddish is going downhill at such a fast rate. But even in the 30s, you read about the writers just complaining and complaining about their children and losing Yiddish so quickly. So for those reasons, I guess, where it's hard to find those sort of recordings of British Yiddish material, and that those writers didn't hit the international, transnational Yiddish world in the same way.
Well, if I can just say, if we have time, so a lot of these recordings, well, some were solicited by me when the writers were alive, about 4 were actually alive. The one from Celia Dropkin is most interesting. This was not something I found in an archive. This was a cassette that she made. I was writing a paper on her, and I had the good fortune to be able to connect with her son, John Dropkin, who was alive at the time. And he gave me this recording, and he said one day his mother just walked down to Coney Island, and there they had these booths where you could go in and record yourself. She took with her a Bintel Lieder, a little packet of her poems. She just sat down and read. And so, it's not, pardon me?
And that's how we have that recording.
That's how we have that recording. So it wasn't like some great, the Yiddish Kulturwelt decided we must record Celia Dropkin. Not at all. So, and then Montreal, the library there, had the good foresight to record almost all of their programs. I'm sure their technology was not fancy. It was probably, just some tape recorder that somebody had, but there are hundreds, thousands of recordings of all of their programs. And they have them, and the Book Center has, I think, taken over putting those online and whatnot. So a lot of it is not very fancy, shall we say, but it happened.
No, and it adds a quality to your listening experience. I think I really appreciate it that they aren't perfectly recorded, that you hear ambient sounds, and I've heard a number of them over the years. So Vivi, you wrote in the introduction for London Yiddish Town about what drew you to the project. Can you give us in a nutshell, just an overview of how the project evolved?
Well, I mean, actually, the idea for doing the book was when I was in the Yiddish Book Center giving a lecture about my previous book, Whitechapel Noise. And at that, it was nearing the deadline for the translation fellowship of the next year, of which I hadn't even heard. And I was speaking to Mindel Cohen, who was running it, and she was telling me about it. And I just thought, I've spent the last 4 years working on poetry and songs of London and looking at the histories behind them. But actually, when I came to Yiddish, I picked up these Yiddish stories. And a decade earlier, I had made rough translations of some of them because I was so engaged by them. And I thought, yes, they've been on the back burner for a long time. I had been working on pre-First World War I material, and these were from the 30s and 40s. These are from pre-war and just post-war. And I thought that what they did was similar in some ways to what the songs do. And I'm a historian, using Yiddish sources. And the Yiddish sources give you something as a historian, the creative sources. So whether it's fiction, stories, sketches, whether it's songs or poetry, whatever it is, it gives you something. It gives you an inroad into the debates that were going on at the time that are not official. So what you get to see is unofficial, you get to see from below, and you get to see, in a way, people's muddled thinking as well as very clear thinking. So when you have sort of official resources, maybe like sources like reports of meetings, you'll have sort of people like carefully putting down exactly what they think. And what you get in these fictional elements are the contradictions, and you get the complications, so it's much more muddled. And I think that muddledness is much more about life. So as a historian, you get something very special when you start looking at them. Now, of course, they're history. I mean, they're fiction, they're not history. So you have to also have that really strongly in your mind, that you're reading something that isn't history, and what you're getting from it is not the facts or anything that it's saying directly. What you're getting is the sense of debate and the sense of the way the community works together or doesn't work together. You get the frictions and you get the antagonisms. And I think that that is what is so drawing. And it's also why they're popular, because people engage with what's going on now, and people engage with the satire and making fun of people they know in the community, and the sort of like foolish things that people are doing and the hypocrisies. So I think that people really love that humor and satire, and that's what is so special about this material.
Well, excuse me, but speaking of their debates, one of the pieces that caught my attention was from Katie Brown's Forward, which was the preface to her first book of collected Yiddish stories, Laugh If You Want To. And it captures that pressurized day-to-day lives of these industrious writers and publishers as they grapple with the idea that the forward, or the preface to the book, is absolutely necessary, as Yiddish was recognized as an endangered language that needed as many words in print as possible. Then there was the pragmatic argument of, forget the forward, since paper was expensive and conserving one's words made it possible for other writers to be published. So would you read this section, but first put the piece in context for us?
Yeah, I'll put the piece in context. So the way you described it just now, you gave some of the important ideas that this story has about the nature of Yiddish and the nature of the language, the nature of publishing. In fact, Katie Brown writes very funny material. Her pieces are based in the life of the East End, but she makes fun of it. And what she's making fun of here, which is particularly interesting, is she's making fun of her colleagues, other writers. So she is in this piece looking at this very close-knit group of writers in the 40s, which was when she wrote this. And she's saying, well, this one would say that about publishing, and this one, well, of course he'd say that because he's going to be jealous of me. And this one over there, well, he's my best friend, so he's going to support me. And everybody who's reading it would know these people. And she uses their real names. And so it makes it very funny. But even if you don't know who they are, and people who've read this who have no idea who they are, say that actually her forward is one of the funniest pieces in the book. So the forward that she writes is really saying, well, should I write a forward or not? I don't know whether I should write a forward to my book. So what I've done is I've invited all my pals, all my writer pals over for tea. And I've said to them, okay, give me some advice. Should I write a forward or not? And what you're going to get is, from halfway through the story, 3 people's different opinions. So what you'll get is the seriousness of them, but with a twinkle. So the bit that I'm going to read is from about halfway into the story, and she's been asking different people their opinions. She's got her chevra around her, her community of writers sitting with her on a Thursday afternoon in her house for tea, and she's saying to them, should I write a forward or not? And the first opinion she hears is that of Harry Meyer, who was the editor of the site, the newspaper, the Jewish Times. And he says, no, I don't think you should write a forward because you don't need to introduce yourself. Everyone knows you. And anyhow, paper's expensive. And I take over from here. But my friend A.M. Fuchs says it is worthwhile to write a forward, even if it costs more, because where does a writer have an opportunity to say whatever they want, if not in the forward of their own book? No one can advise an author on what to write in it because the foreword belongs to them. And with that sort of opportunity, one should write straight from the heart and let the reader or listener hear what they have to say. It's about time that what we say gets heard out there in public, rather than just talking about it amongst ourselves. My friend Moshe Ovid is of the same opinion, that I should write a foreword because every printed word in Yiddish is of great significance. One must take that into account and write even more, because in these dreadful times when the Yiddish language is boycotted, assimilated and substituted into foreign languages, we cannot engage with it lightly. The opposite, we must use it more. And if we don't, we're the enemies of Yiddish language and not the friends. And with regard to the expenditure, don't worry, just leave it to him. My friend S. Palmer said that he is of Harry Meyer's opinion, that we have to economize on paper. And also a second thing is that it will give someone else an opportunity, because he knows a writer who also wants to publish a work, and why not indeed? He has it all prepared, but the printer has said that there's a great shortage of paper, and he'll have to wait until other writers stop printing. He also admits that he's generally not into forewords because he knows from experience that the reader won't understand them. However, if it were an introduction, a preface, or a prologue, he would approve of it, because that's something completely different, especially if you can do it successfully in rhyme. And if it works well, then your readership will see that you don't only write prose, but you can write poetry too. And he assured me that even though he is a poet, he wouldn't be jealous of me. So you get this lovely, like, playing with these writers and their different opinions, but they're coming up with very real issues as well. And just to say that the comment about the enemies of Yiddish and the friends of Yiddish was a little in-joke, because every Shabbos afternoon there was a group called the Friends of Yiddish that used to meet and read each other from their works and from visitors' works who were coming through London.
Well, you know, and it's kind of ironic because with all the supply chain shortages we're having as a result of the pandemic, we have a paper shortage going on right now. So it's kind of, you know, this full circle. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so glad to have your books on our shelves. And thanks to all of you out there in cyberspace. The books are both featured on our homepage at detourbooks.com, so they'll be easy to find. So enjoy browsing and see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.